UFC Vegas 24, aka UFC Fight Night. We have Robert the Reaper Whittaker taking on Kelvin Gastelum. Boxing MMA picks. We are back with another video, another prediction video here, giving you our UFC breakdown, UFC analysis, letting you know which fights to avoid, which fights are giving you really good value, which fights are not worth the value, and maybe some underdog picks that you want to go with. And if you stick around to the end, you might even get some parlay action going on as well. Now, I go by the name of Harris, flying solo today. We have UFC Vegas 24, as I mentioned, Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. 12 fights on this card. In our usual fashion, I am going to start with the prelims, starting with fight number 1, Tony Gravely versus Anthony Birchak. Now, for this fight, I'll start with breaking down Tony Gravely. Good wrestler, pretty athletic. He's not bad in any one particular area. I like his boxing. Has some decent kickboxing, I should say. So he kind of gives you that kickboxer wrestler combination, which is a pretty decent, two disciplines to have in today's UFC. He had a pretty good battle with Brett Johns, even though he lost that fight. So that showed me some of his toughness and his ability to, make it a tough fight should it need to be. He had a really good fight with DeFreitas as well. If you watch his last fight, he won a split decision in that one. But in that fight, what he showed me was that really good wrestling ability, that really good takedown ability. DeFreitas had the better grappling, but that wasn't really a factor in that fight, as Tony Gravely was kind of having his way with the wrestling. When I look at Anthony Birchak, I mean, he likes to come forward. He has a pretty decent calf kick. He's going to throw a lot into his punches. So, of course, if he catches you, that could be an issue. Definitely has some pop, and he does push a high pace pretty early in the fight as well. Doesn't really have the best striking defense, in my opinion. Doesn't really have the best takedown defense either. But he does have some grappling, and he does have some submissions. Now, as I mentioned, DeFreitas wasn't really able to do his thing versus Tony Gravely in grappling situations. Gravely was able to use his wrestling and kind of be too much for DeFreitas. And I kind of see the same thing happening in this fight here versus Anthony Birchak. I think the wrestling is going to be too much. I think the takedowns will be too much. See, that Tapology agrees with me here at 91% in favor of Tony Gravely. Again, I think Gravely has a pretty clear path to victory in this one. I think he's going to capitalize on it. And I think for that reason, he's going to give you, minus 300 as a favorite on the odds. What I will say, for a fighter of the caliber of Tony Gravely, I probably don't trust minus 300. But I do think, again, this is a very favorable matchup for him. And I think he pulls this one out, winning over Anthony Birchak. Moving on to fight number 2, we're going to talk about Zarah Fairn versus Josiane Nunes. What I will warn everyone of this fight, stay completely away from this one. Don't have any interest in betting this fight to any capacity. Respectfully speaking, this is a very low-level fight between the two. Zarah Fairn is 0-2 in the UFC. I mean, she has losses versus Megan Anderson, as well as Felicia Spencer, obviously quality opponents, but they severely outclassed her. She has a sort of a long style of stand-up, kind of a stiff style in some ways. Uses her jab pretty often. Of course, she's going to have that 5-inch reach advantage, pretty long with the 1-2 combinations. Really basic stand-up, though. She almost even looks green in the ring there. I feel like she needs, some significant improvements in her stand-up in general. And both of her UFC losses, they occurred on the ground, right? She doesn't really have the best takedown defense either. Doesn't really have the best knowledge on the ground in general. Looking at Josiane Nunes, this is her UFC debut. She's a southpaw. Her style's kind of wild, very green in the stand-up in her own right. Not many good things that I can comment on. I'll be completely honest with you. Bit of a brawler type. She has that power for sure. 4 of her 7 wins, she's 7-1. 4 of her wins are via punches and or TKO. Seems to be a bit of a grappler. A lot of submission attempts, but a lot of her submission attempts were in compromised positions from what I was seeing. So that definitely concerns me in terms of when she goes for it. What's interesting to note for this fight is that this fight is at 135 pounds. As I mentioned, Zarah Fairn has a few fights at 145. So I do expect, not only with the height, not only with the reach, but I do expect Zarah Fairn to be the bigger fighter in this one. Again, two low-level fighters. I'm making a very hesitant pick here for Zarah Fairn as the slight underdog at plus 110. I guess she has the better tools, right? I guess she has the better tools, especially if she can keep this one on the outside, keep it, off the ground, avoid any sort of big strikes. If Josiane Nunes is to win this fight, I do think it'll be a fight where Zarah Fairn is, primarily winning the round before Josiane Nunes lands one, because she does have that sort of, one punch power, as I've seen in some of her previous fights. So again, I'm avoiding this one at all costs, but I'm making a hesitant pick for Zarah Fairn. Should you put a gun to my head and tell me pick one of these two fighters to win the fight? Let's move on to fight number 3. We have Bartosz Fabiński versus Gerald Meerschaert. Now, for this one, not really much to gather from Meerschaert in his last 2 fights. I mean, we know that he had some pretty embarrassing performances. 14-second loss to Khamzat Chimaev, followed by, I believe it was a 1-minute loss to who was that fight against? That one was against 1 second here. Let's pull up his record and take a look together. That one was against Ian Heinisch. So again, not really much to pull from there. You kind of have to go back to his Duran win fight, where he did win via rear naked choke, to really pull what type of fighter he is at this stage in his career. Pretty basic, right? I mean, he has kind of a basic stand-up style, doesn't really bring the fight to the ground. If we take a look at some UFC stats here and go back to Gerald Meerschaert, let's pull this up here. You'll see here only really, less than 2.5 takedowns per fight, 43% takedown accuracy. Definitely not going to bring the fight to the ground, and not really going to have the best time defending those takedowns. That's a huge concern to me in this fight, because Bartosz Fabiński, as we can see with his stats here, he's definitely going for that takedown. He lands a good amount of them. He's looking to smother you on top. He, 7 takedowns per fight in 5 UFC fights. That's pretty impressive, right? That's something that you want to take note of. I like his pressure on the cage as well. He's happy to clinch, happy to grind it out, happy to make it an ugly fight. Bring me back to March 2020. He actually has a win versus Darren Stewart, and that was in Cage Warriors. So that wasn't a UFC fight, but of course we know Darren Stewart to be somebody that is of UFC caliber. So that definitely tells me that, Fabiński belongs at this level. And, with Fabiński in the stand-up, as somebody who's going to go for the takedown, in the stand-up, what he presents me with a lot of jabbing, a lot of head movement, a lot of level changes as well. Makes it very obvious that he's going to want to go for the takedown. Ultimately, I think he's going to land it, right? I think he's going to be too much for Meerschaert. I think his pressure is going to be a little bit too much. I think he's going to have a very clear path to victory. I think the takedowns are going to be a very big part of this match, and I think he's going to land them. I think Meerschaert is going to have a hard time in this one, and I don't think Meerschaert's hands are enough to stop Fabiński from coming in. I mean, again, if you watch Fabiński's fight versus Darren Stewart, we know Darren Stewart to have much scarier hands than Meerschaert, and his hands weren't enough to stop Fabiński from coming in. So, I feel decent about Fabiński in this matchup. I think this is a favorable matchup for him, and I think he gets the job done. I'm going to move on to fight number 4, Jessica Penne versus Lupita Godinez. I'll keep this one real short. Jessica Penne is 38 years old. She hasn't fought since 2017. If you bring me back to 2017, she has 3 L's in a row. So she really hasn't won a fight since 2015, if we really want to take a look. Let's take a look at her record together here. So we have a loss versus Danielle Taylor, a loss versus Jessica Andrade, a loss versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Has not won a fight since she beat Randa Marcos December 2014. So, she hasn't seen victory in quite a while. I don't think she sees victory in this fight either. She's taking on a young prospect, undefeated, in Lupita Godinez. She has competed. Godinez, I'm speaking of here. She has competed in LFA and Combate, right? So I mean, she's been at some decent level of competition. She actually beat Vanessa Demopoulos to win the strawweight title in her LFA debut, and in some degrees outclassed Demopoulos in that fight. So she showed me quite a bit. She showed me a good confidence level. She showed me a good swagger level in that fight. I like her boxing skills. I like her movement, good in and out movement from her, and pretty good accuracy on her punches. But sort of more impressively, I like her wrestling. Good takedown skills, good wrestling skills in general. Essentially, you imagine this fight is set up for Lupita Godinez to win, and I think really that's what it's going to be, right? I think she's a big favorite for a reason. I don't think Penne will be able to handle her. I don't see any path for Jessica Penne whatsoever. Lupita Godinez, I mean, she's a name. She's a name that I'm going to be paying attention to in this strawweight division. I'm curious to see, what her next fight looks like, because I do think that she gets past Jessica Penne pretty easily in this one. I'm going Lupita Godinez all the way on that. Let's move on to fight number 5. We have Alexander Romanov versus Juan Espino. Sorry. This is a tough one. This is one that might not be as obvious as you think. I'm going to pull up the Tapology profiles on this one here. The first thing that you might notice is that Espino is 40 years old, and you sort of ask yourself, how does he have a shot here versus a young prospect in Alexander Romanov, who's had a couple of very impressive performances in the UFC already? With Espino, that age, I mean, you can't really factor it in, right? I mean, he's performed well. He's looked good. He's a good grappler. He goes for takedowns, good wrestler. A lot of things that I like from him. I like his movement as well. And if we take a look at his wins here, of course, he's 10-1. We'll see that, he's had some recent fights. September 2020. Prior to that, of course, a little bit of a layoff. So he's not somebody who has taken a few years off and is just making a return at 40 years old. He's somebody who has been pretty active in his UFC career since winning the Ultimate Fighter. Looking at Alexander Romanov, I mean, we know what we're going to expect from him. That power wrestling type of style, very strong for the division. We saw what he did to Rogerio de Lima, giving him that forearm choke. That was nuts. Just had him on his back, shoved his forearm in his throat, and choked him out that way. And we saw what he did to Rocky Martinez, of course, winning via arm triangle choke. He looked dominant in both of those fights. Like I mentioned, he has that power wrestling style. He has really good takedowns. He has really good takedown technique. Decent speed in the division as well, right? I don't know. This one has some factors that would make it a tough fight. Espino provides some qualities that I do like, but what I'm really paying attention to in this one is I'm assuming that Romanov will be the much stronger fighter in this one. Espino, you see, weighs in at 255, at least in his last fight. He looks a bit more like a trimmer type of heavyweight as opposed to a heavyweight. And I think that's going to be the advantage that Romanov needs to sort of implement that wrestling style that he's looking for. I do, like I said, I expect Romanov to be the stronger man here. I think both guys are going to want to take the fight to the ground. Heavyweight beware in this one. At the end of the day, one punch can change the tides in either direction. But ultimately, I think Romanov is going to be the stronger guy here. I think he's going to implement his wrestling in a more effective way compared to Espino. And at minus 140, I think there's some potentially really good value here in Alexander Romanov. Although, again, this is a tough fight that might not be as obvious as it seems. Let's move on to a fight that might be pretty obvious. I'm going to go with Tracy Cortez versus Justine Kish. And I'll keep this one short as well. Tracy Cortez all the way on this one. That's really all I got to say. This fight is happening at 125. We know Justine Kish is sort of a true 125er. Tracy Cortez has competed at 135. I like her better at 125. I think she, is a stronger competitor at 125. So again, she's at what I feel is a better weight class for her, where she's going to be the bigger fighter. She's going to be the stronger fighter as well. Justine Kish, when we look at her, she has that sort of awkward style of stand-up. It's not really much technique behind it. There is pretty good movement around the ring, but not really much else beyond that. She's not going to use a technical style to really have the advantage on the feet. Rather, she's going to use her movement as much as she can to try to avoid strikes. I don't really like that from a perspective of being able to win a round. Pretty one-dimensional as well. The takedown is not a huge part of her game. She only averages one takedown per fight at 35% takedown accuracy. And this is one of those fights to me where Tracy Cortez ultimately is much better, or at least a little better, pretty much everywhere in this fight. Tracy Cortez, she has good overall stand-up. She has good movement around the ring as well to sort of match that movement of Justine Kish. Pretty light on her feet, Tracy Cortez, good fakes, good feints. I like her wrestling. Although she only lands the takedown at 42, 43%, she does average 3 takedowns per fight. So it does show her ability to use that time and time again to win rounds and ultimately to win fights. Pretty well-rounded fighter. Like I said, I just think she's better everywhere in this one. I think she's bigger, stronger, probably faster, has the much better stand-up, and has the better wrestling. So I don't see a path for Justine Kish to win this one. So again, Cortez is going to be a pretty comfortable pick for me. Ending off the prelims, let's of course take it to Vegas. We have a couple of picks that I want to take a look at. I'm going to start with first providing you guys with, let's talk underdog. I guess let's talk underdog first. Now, if I'm looking at the underdog picks here, of course, Romanov is a favorite. Fabiński is a favorite. Godinez is a favorite. Gravely is a favorite. And Cortez is a favorite. That leaves me really with one hesitant underdog pick to provide you guys with. Zarah Fairn dos Santos to beat Josiane Nunes. She's a plus 110 in that fight. Again, pretty reluctant, pretty hesitant underdog pick. And I'm not going to suggest you actually bet on that. But of course, just to provide you with the underdog that I feel has the best opportunity to win the fight on the prelim card. And if I'm taking a look at maybe some of my favorite fights on this prelim card here, I really like Lupita Godinez, the newcomer, to get it done. I really like Tracy Cortez, as I mentioned. And you know what? From a path to victory perspective, I really like, where is that at? There we go. I really like Bartosz Fabiński. All 3 of those fights, not necessarily saying I would parlay them together, but maybe I would. Maybe I'll throw a little bit of money on this for some early card action, providing me some winnings for the main card video coming up next for that, of course. But those 3 fights, I mean, that'll provide you with a plus 222. $100 will return $322 for our larger bettors. $250 will return $806. Again, Lupita Godinez, I feel, is just the much better fighter. Tracy Cortez, I feel, is better everywhere in that fight. And Fabiński, I feel, has a very clear path to victory. So I'm feeling pretty good about those 3 fights. Some decent value on the betting lines as well if you were to parlay them together. Let's end it at that, though. Let's end it at that. That is going to be the end of the prelim video. Please do all that algorithmic stuff to help us out as usual. We would greatly appreciate it. Like the page, comment on the videos. Let us know, who are your underdog picks? Who are your favorite picks? What parlays are you looking at for this prelim card? Subscribe, of course. Subscribe. We would definitely appreciate that. Share this video with anyone that you know, anyone that needs additional UFC breakdown, UFC analysis, and I mean, share it with anyone that you know if you want to compare picks as well. Now, as usual, I go by the name of Harris, flying solo today. It's all good. Boxing, MMA picks, prelim video, of course, for UFC Vegas 24, aka UFC Fight Night. Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. Let's get this money.